Hey, howdy ho, and seasons greetings. Welcome back to Destination, your place for all things Destino. I'm your host, Poteet, and today I am your coach as we return to Coaching Corner. Today we will be diving into making a Mangatar. So right now we are just a couple of days away from the premiere of Shiratoko, and we have one final Mangatar to go before they're all done. And I figured, why not use this as an opportunity to show people how the manga creation process goes, um, and hopefully give them some tips and tricks to improve on their skills. So this very last Mangatar is Cam, who will be a member of our Brawn tribe, this being Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty, and we have a pic crew supplied to us. So a lot of the times we'll have images supplied as selfies and other avatars like this. Pic crew being one of the most popular, thus one of the things that's easiest to convert. There is no rhyme or reason to Cam being chosen. I just want to declare this. It's really just he had a pic crew. He was the only person in our cast with exactly a pic crew, as a matter of fact, for submission. And I figured that was the easiest thing where I could show the differences. So, without further ado, my goal is going to be to recreate this Mangatar, this pic crew, as closely as possible in Mangatar style. So I went ahead and made the Mangatar. At the end of the day, there's not really much I can show there. You're just trying to make it look as much like it as possible, but at the end of the day, I came up with this. Now, you'll notice, they don't really look alike. We will get there. Don't you worry. So first off, we are going to start by getting rid of this gray, ugly background and having our Mangatar stand as a PNG. So first things first, you'll notice there's some white around the edges. The way that I take the screenshot is I use the snipping tool here, and so I want to go ahead and get rid of this background. So I use Pixlr as my editor. It's free web browser, so it's something that if you don't have money for Photoshop, if you don't want to use GIMP or Inkscape or anything like that, it is reliable. It has a lot of tools. The one drawback being that it is a pixel editor, so you lose the quality in the Mangatars a lot of the time if you're not careful. And so I'm going to go here. So you'll notice there is some lighter colored edges of it still. I want to avoid that. I want to try to prevent as much degradation of the image as possible, so I want to ensure that there is no um, of these outer lines here to ensure that only the really high quality parts of the image are kept. And so I took my marquee tool and I went into these two far corners. You can also just do this with the whole image. I find the far corners the easiest. So I selected one corner and then I held down Shift. Keyboard shortcuts being your friend. You have your modes up here, so Shift allows you to add to your selection. So I can just do all these things. Whereas if I held down Control, I could remove from the selection, get rid of stuff I don't want in my selection. And if I just didn't have it selected, it would just deselect everything and make a new selection. I don't want that. Now that I have my corner selected, it will, when I crop it, crop everything between the farthest edges of these marquees. So it's going to be the highest, lowest, leftmost, and rightmost points, and that's why I always go for the edges. And so, if you're using Pixlr, it's really good to familiarize yourself with the menu. I'm not going to focus so much on that. I'm just going to tell you what tool I would use for the job, and we are going to go to Page here and go to Crop. Boom. So we have our Mangatar without the edges. Now, I will warn you, Pixlr keeps the information outside, so you still have those white borders out there. They are just not in your workspace right now, but they are still out there. So now we want to get rid of this gray stuff. So the way that I always go about doing this is I go over to the lasso tool. And so normally it's going to be on this freehand where you have to hold down in order to make it work. I don't like that. I like to go to polygon. Polygon allows you to click and point. And so you can, if you shake your hands like me especially, or if you definitely just don't want to go through the whole path of the Mangatar trying to make it work, polygon's just going to be so much easier. You can zoom in and out as you please, and you're just going to want to keep the lasso somewhere within this outer edge of your Mangatar. We'll go in and get the rest of the stuff once we have this all selected. So that extra stuff outside of my line, we will get back to that. So just going to take my time, make sure that I'm not jumping too far in, I don't want to go in here, and I don't want to jump out into that outer gray. However, they will be easy to fix, once again using that shift tool. So I want to just do it intentionally here. We'll get back to that. Don't fret if you make a mistake. Every mistake is fixable. That's the beauty of editing. So we're going to, now that we have our Mangatar, we are going to double click to save our selection. So now I'm free to do other stuff with the selection. But we have these back up here. So once again, same process with the marquee tool. Shift will add to selection, Control will remove. So we got this stuff here that I want to remove. So I held down Control to start, and I removed it. I didn't go far enough, and you'll see there's still some there. So you just want to make sure that you have it fully encircled. Once again, right there. Perfect. So now that we have all that, we're going to go over to the wand tool. And once again, holding shift to add to the selection. We're just going to click once on the outside here. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. If you want to add more or less of the pixels to your image, you can increase and decrease the tolerance. I think normally it's set about 32. You can change that as you will. And then once you have this Mangatar fully selected, you will right click or Control I to go to invert selection, and then you can delete if you have the right image layer selected, which I did not. And there we go. Now we have our background gone. Once again, this white stuff's still out here. Remember, that was not part of what we had in our workspace. As such, it was not counted as part of it, but that won't be a problem for the time being. Now we can focus on getting in these details. So one of the first things I want to do is stuff that's going to be different. For instance, the hair color is close enough. I'm not too bothered with the hair color. The skin color is pretty far off, so I'm going to go ahead and try to change that. So there's a couple ways of doing it. I want to try what's the easier way first, and that's going to be the color replace tool here on the side. And so you have a couple different options with it. Once again, you can change the tolerance if you want it more, but it changes the color slightly. I think the opacity is pretty low right now, so if we turn it up, you really get in that color change. Sometimes it'll change the color of stuff you don't want it to change, and that's where you have to change tolerance or change your brush size or something. And so that's pretty darn close now, so I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. I think we're good to move on from that. And we can jump over to the eyes. These eyes are two very different colors. We want to make sure that we can get both those colors in. So once again, we can just stick with this tool here. I want to bump down the size to fit something more into the eye. And so you'll notice that it did not get this inner part of the eye here. That's because the tolerance is too low. But if I do it here, the white gets selected. And you'll notice with every part I select, it creates a different effect on the eye. That's just based on it's changing, it's replacing the color and its information. So it's hue, saturation, brightness, its fill, all that is changing based off of the spot that you select it from. So you just want to be cognizant of that as you do this, but I'm pretty happy with that color for it. I think it's, actually, we could probably make that a bit more purple. Once again, you gotta have the right image layer selected, of course. If it lets us do anything. And another way that you can always do this is simply take your fill. Oh gosh. That is not what I want. You can always take your fill tool here. So I'll just pick up these two purples. And I can just sort of fill it in directly. Now, you'll notice there's all these pixels here. So I want to bump up my tolerance to try to get more of those caught up. And that one caught on the black. So maybe on that one, I want to decrease the tolerance. Remember, at the close level, nobody's really going to be paying attention to that. So at the end of the day, it's far more important that you just make it look good from a distance. And at the end of the day, that looks pretty good from a distance. And I think that matches the color pretty nicely. And so once again, we're going to do that here. So let's pick up these blues. And we can go over to this eye. let's just do this here, and we'll pick a darker color just for the purpose of symmetry. And you can always just take like a pen tool or something for any little tweaks you need to make. Just really sort of the idea of just keep on trying until it looks right. And from this far out, I would say that looks pretty good. So you can already just see the significant change that we've had on here. So now, let's go ahead and take a look at these clothes. So, facial manga really does not have an option like this outer shirt. So the closest I went to was this, but there are some changes I don't like. For instance, I don't like these white sort of zippers, I suppose. So I want to go ahead and take those out. And so I'm just going to take my pen tool here. I'm going to freehand this. You can do it whatever way you want. You have all these tools here. You can paint it. You can draw squares. You can do whatever you feel is going to get the job done. And I'm also going to do this on a new layer, so I don't have to work so hard to undo mistakes later on. I always suggest if you're trying something new, just do it on a new layer. There's no risk to doing it on a new layer. You can copy stuff over to new layers. It's perfectly fine to do. So I'm just going to sort of draw these out. And we'll see how that ends up looking once we're done with this side. And I just went ahead and did a little bit over on there just to make sure. So let's take a look there. I kind of like it. It's still a little off from the shirt, of course, because these don't extend down. So what I think I will actually do is get rid of this whole section here. Once again, I'm still on this upper layer, and I can always just go back to how it looked before simply by hiding that layer. So I'm going to decrease the amount here to try to get that pixel effect a bit closer. And I'm just going to run this straight over. I want to try to just make sure I can maintain the width that it has. Alright, I quite like that. I think that looks a lot better and definitely closer to the original shirt. It's not going to be perfect, but at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be. And so I'm just going to do something lazy here. We'll see how it turns out. I'm just going to copy this so it's on a separate layer, and I'm just going to flip it horizontally, pull it over, and then see what changes I got to make. Because facial mangatars are not symmetrical. That's rule number one you should know. Mangatars are not symmetrical. Why is an excellent question, but they are not. So I'm just going to erase this whole upper section here. But by doing that, I just cut out a lot of time because now I only have to tweak these upper parts. And I want to decrease the size to a really small brush just so I can fine tune these details here. All right, not bad, not bad at all. So let's look back at this. So we're going to get a pattern on that outer shirt, obviously, at some point. So let's look at the other two parts of this image that I can see that are not present right now. That's going to be this cross and these headphones. So thankfully for me, Well, the cross is super easy. You basically just draw the two lines yourself. But the headphones already exist, and I actually have them open right here. You have this Mangatar made by the amazing Flare, I do believe. And um, quite frankly, it's easy to steal Mangatar R Essence. So thank Flare for the contribution to this Mangatar. Good work as always. So I just want to shrink this Mangatar down. And so for this one, I'm going to go back to my wand tool. And so I'm just going to try to trace the outer edge because, of course, the outline of these headphones are black and that bleeds into the face of your Mangatar. And so I'm just going to try to freehand it, eyeball it, really just do what feels right. And so you'll notice that you have a line about this thick going up. So I'm just going to try to catch that line roughly. So I think that looks about right, and I can just sort of extend this upwards. Because you also have to note that the face shape is different, and so you're going to have to make some tweaks in order to maintain the face shape. So it's always better to go a little bit wider because you can always just tweak it on the Mangatar over there. But if you go too small, you can always just patch it up with the pen tool. So, once again, every little mess up you make, you can always bounce back from when it comes to editing mangas. Especially if you do layers. Always do layers. Layers are your friend. They are your lifeblood. And I'm only going to do one side and copy it over because they are identical, and I can just make the tweaks necessary once I'm over there. Now, if it wasn't already made, it's not something that you would ever really have to do, just because custom artwork is incredibly difficult to do. It's doable, but it's incredibly difficult. Yeah, so you can already see that, but luckily, by getting that black right there, we can sort of just blend it in. But, first things first, you'll notice that if you follow the outer edge, it is not black, because this Mangatar has glare on it. And so, we need to try to find some state where it blends in with the Mangatar. So, one of your options is color lookup. Color lookup is one of my most used tools on facial manga. So it's an adjustment color lookup. It basically allows you to handpick the colors you're using. And so, honestly, having gray headphones is not a bad idea because the Brawn tribe this season is a black tribe. So, a lot easier to just go with something like that if we have to. But I'll work in a tiny bit of color. Blue generally goes pretty well. You know, you get like a little steely blue in there. And so you'll notice there's like stuff with the pixels and stuff. So you just play around until it looks halfway decent. I think it's getting there. Maybe a little less on the blue. I quite like that. I think that works. Simple effect. So let's get rid of this upper portion, bleed it into the shape of the face a little better. We can keep the lower portion, but what I'm going to do is go back to the base Mangatar, use the wand tool, select the outline. So now I can just take my eraser, go in, and reselect the right layer. Don't worry, this stuff happens all the time. You just notice and fix it right away. And I just go in and I erase that. And so boom, it goes right behind the head perfectly right there. You see that jawline and it cuts in right there, giving it a nice effect. It fits in with the Mangatar. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to the mouse tool so I can flip horizontal. I'm just going to drag it over here. Try to position it in the same spot. And boom, those are the headphones. So they fit in real nice. So let's get in that cross necklace. You notice it's a bit of a mess over here. I normally try to be a little bit more tidy with it, but I'm going to group it all together at the very end once we're all nice and finito. So, there's a basic cross earring. So let's look at how far we've come. Because already you can see it's looking pretty pretty far along. Really, I just need to do stuff with the clothing at the bottom here. Everything else, I would say, is up to my standards of what I would want done with my Mangatars. Everything else is on par. So let's find a pattern. So every single one I put in powerful. I've just been doing keywords to try to narrow down searches. Strong tribe. Let's do mighty. I don't know. If you throw in keywords, you can get different patterns and stuff. And so I just want a pattern that looks good and also a little unique if I can find one, while still being relevant. Another tip I always have whenever you're looking at patterns, go to Tools, Size, Large if you're using Google. It'll only give you larger images. So if I just take it back to Japanese pattern, it's only going to, once I reapply that filter, it's only going to give you large file images. This one's 2000 by 1811, for example. Ooh, I like that one. I've done some version of the waves, but not that version. That one's different enough. We can do that one. So you'll paste it in. I always, instead of trying to save the images, I always right-click, get the image URL, and I go to Layer, Add URL as Layer, and I can paste it in off of that. So whenever I do clothes, you'll notice that a lot of my Mangatar clothes, here's everyone else in the cast. I've not added Aaron for some reason, or Barbie. I'll add them in later. You'll notice that my clothes keep the Mangatar shading intact. So this is a little something that we do with the blend mode. So if you just right click on any layer here, you can add a blend mode. I always do multiply to start, but pretty much anything soft light and above can have a decent effect depending on what you do. They each have different ones. Sometimes one works better than the other. So always play around with it. The rest of them are more like negatives and exceptions to the rules in a lot of ways. So you sort of lose a lot of the control that you wanted with it. So I always just do it with multiply, just because it's the number one option, and it's usually the one I go for because it requires the least amount of changes, because a lot of them lay in too heavily on the white that I usually keep in the clothes. So I'm just going to go around, hide the headphones, and I'm just going to trace the clothes that I want to have the pattern. So I'm going to skip this shirt and tie it in the middle, because I do not want them to have the pattern. So here we go. Then once again, same rule that we did when we were removing the background. We're going to go to the wand tool. We're going to hold Control to remove from selection. And I'm on the wrong layer. You want to go to the background layer, so I'm on the right one now. Boom. So now we have the issue of these here not fitting in right. So let's go over to these layers and just once again holding Control. Click right here to get those exempted, and click right here to get those added back in. Okay. And now I can right click, invert selection, and go to the pattern here. Boom. And so the only reason that gray is there is because it's under those. If I move it up, it's nice and fine. Alright, so now I'm going to just play around with some stuff. You can go into adjustment and filter and try different color options and stuff. You can try some different ones of these. For me, I'm going to go to color lookup because I want to match them to their tribe color. And he's on the black tribe, so for this tribe, I'm usually going for these grays and whatnot, as opposed to anything else. So there we go. That looks pretty nice to me. So then I'm going to go back here. I don't want this blue tie. I'm going to go for a gray. Let's see if we can do a color lookup. Usually color lookup doesn't like to respond to gray colors. Yeah, it just turns it to that. So let's hit the paint tool. We just do that. Let's make it a bit of a darker tie. Just make it pop out a little more. In fact, we can probably go like super close to black. Yeah, there we go. So I quite like this. I think this looks pretty snazzy. So now that we have all of this, we can go ahead and right click on the highest visible layer and merge visible. So this is everything that we can see. But of course I forgot to get the headphones, so let's add those back in. So everything that we can see has been merged into one layer. I'm going to copy this layer, undo it just so I have everything loose again in case I need to go back for something. Go over to this. This is my big file that has all the Mangatars on it. And I'm going to paste it in. I'm just going to keep them at the top, but as you can see, I have it sorted alphabetically on the side here. I'm going to go back and fix that later. I just want to make sure I can move stuff around. So I always like to keep my stuff named efficiently just for sake of ease. And so we have 2 final steps before this Mangatar is all done, and we are all finished. And that is going to be adding the buff and adding lighting. So first off, for the buff, the way that I do it is different from a lot of other orgs. It's up to you. If you are adding buffs, there's different ways to do it. This is the way that I personally prefer because it's not too difficult. So I take my pen tool. I currently have it set to the size that I like using, which is 11, the amount being 45. So the amount really is just going to be sort of how much pressure is put on it. If you put 0, you'll notice there's like versus 100, that might be best. You'll see both of them have different amounts of pixelation on them. It doesn't really have too big of an effect compared to a lot of the other settings like opacity and size, but I like the size 11. I feel like it's a pretty good one. And so then I'm just going to try to freehand a buff. So if you don't like it, you can always undo or erase it. And so it's really hard to see on the black hair, but we'll make it visible here in just a second. That one might be a little big, but let me just do screen or lighter or something. Overlay. Whatever, let's just hide cam. So there's my buff. This is a pretty big one, but I'm honestly not too bothered with that. In fact, let's actually move it up a little bit on the head and redo it. Yeah, let's just redo it further up on the head. I think I'd like it better up there, right up in this range. So you don't have to be a good artist. I wouldn't say I am. I tend to do a lot of trial and error with these just to make it look right. This one turned out pretty darn well right here, but I just want to trim off these edges here, make it look nice and complete. All right, so now I'm going to take my buff color. So my buffs are 3 sets, which is border, buff, and color. So I want to hide Cam because he's in front of everyone else and go to a member of his tribe to get the base color, which will be Grady. Thank you, Grady. So I have 2 colors here because, once again, Mangatar shading style. I try to recreate that a little bit. It's not super visible, but it does add something to it in my humble opinion. So border's always going to be the top layer out of the 3. Color's going to be the bottom. And we blend the buff image in the middle. And so I'm going to start with my lighter color. I'm going to take my brush and just fill in the border. If you go over, you can always just erase it. So then we're going to swap to this one. I always like to use the pen tool for this part and pull out the Mangatar and just try to somewhat mimic the shading on the head. Does not have to be exact, but I just sort of go up from near that shading at a bit of an inward angle. So then I'm going to just hide these for my sake. Let's reduce the tolerance. Perfect. Then I can just do this. Alright. So now, let's add the buff. So I always keep my buff saved at the top, so I don't have to paste in the link 20 times. So we'll make it visible. It's pretty large. So we'll just size it down. Just make sure that it's still outside of the edge of that. So perfect. Let's do it down here just for some variety. I think I did most of them at the top. So, something I do depending on the shape of the buff, and I'll do it a little bit here, is I go to Edit and Free Distort. So Free Distort allows you to take the edges of the image and just stretch them out however you want. Since this side feels a little wider to me, I want to go for a little bit wider on that side and a little bit shrunken on this side. And it just has a very minute effect on the overall image. So you can definitely get that sense of stretching. I'm going to shrink it back down a little bit more, so it fits a little better, and then I want to do a little bit of a rotation so it's aligned a little better. And so then I will go to my cam buff image. I will go to Select. Select Pixels is a really good tool that you'll be using fairly often in your Mangatar journey. It selects the pixels that you have on that layer. I'm going to invert my selection and delete from the buff layer. Then I'm going to go here, and the blend mode I've been using for these buffs is hard light. I sometimes change it season to season depending on the buff. But there we go. It looks pretty snazzy up there. And then sometimes you'll have hair poking out and stuff. I can't tell what that is. Just in case, I'll just take the eraser here, because if it is, it'll clean it up. It is not hair, so we're all good. And the very last thing is your lighting. So for me, I always just take like a gradient of some kind that uses the sky color, and then it goes into a darker version of itself. And so right here, you'll see it. If I just decrease the opacity all the way on this, you have this thing based off of the coloration of these clouds up here. And so then I do my blend mode, which I was doing soft light. Then I bumped it down to 85, and it just creates this nice lighting effect. It helps fit the Mangatar within the environment a little more naturally. You can do other stuff. You can do glare effects. You can do glow, whatever kind of stuff you want to do. But definitely play around with your options here. But I want it to fit to the Mangatar. I don't want it to go into the background of the image because it throws that off a little bit. So I'm going to go to the Mangatar, select Pixels to get just the pixels of the Mangatar. Then I'm going to go up here, go to my buff border, take the wand tool, shift, and click on the border. Then I want to go to my wand tool, shift click in order to get these sections. And we have the entirety of our Mangatar surrounded. Invert selection. We're going to go to fog base, delete. Now the effect is just on the Mangatar. You can see the Mangatar change. It just looks so much more fitting within the environment once it gets this effect on here. And so we are all done. I can go ahead and save this image. And we have a Mangatar. So if you have any questions about this process, about any suggestions, I'm all ears. I'm always willing to help. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next time